What is a hero? A mythological figure, often of divine descent, endowed with great strength or ability? An illustrious warrior? No. It's a person admired for achievements and noble qualities, one who shows great courage. Welcome to the What's a Hero podcast, where we dive deep into what a hero is and what makes them that hero. I'm your host, Ken Fraunfelter, and I'm going to be introducing you to some of the world's most likely and unlikely heroes. You may have never heard of them before, and they most likely have never met you. But they all have one thing in common. They are ready to do whatever it takes to help make you better, even if it means sacrificing everything for you. Let's get into it.
This is episode 59 of the What's a Hero podcast with me, Ken Fraunfelter. There's always another way. No matter how much you prepare, life will sometimes throw a wrench in your plans. But as long as you have enough grit and determination, you can always pull yourself out of whatever circumstances you find yourself in. In his 1957 biographical film, The Wings of Eagles, John Wayne plays the adventurous Frank Spig Weed, a U.S. Navy pilot with an intense passion for bolstering the Navy's aviation program. Spig is eventually promoted to fighter squadron commander, but before he can step into the new role, he falls down a flight of stairs and becomes paralyzed from the neck down, effectively keeping him from ever flying a plane again. However, Spig realizes there is still a lot left to live for. After months of telling himself, "I'm going to move that toe," he regains movement in his arms and hands and can even walk with braces and canes. Once his body is able to, and his spirits are renewed, the Navy asks Spig to write a military-related film script for Hollywood, a task he excels at. And after the Japanese bomb Pearl Harbor, Spig re-enters the service and has the brilliant idea to use Jeep carriers so downed planes can quickly be replaced. Though Spig had undoubtedly dreamed of flying those planes himself, he found many other ways to be of service to his country. No matter what your limitations are, there's always a way to achieve your goals, sometimes more than one. Now, why do I read a story about John Wayne and his character Spig from that movie? Well, basically, like it says, you never know what's going to happen. You never know what life is going to throw at you. You never know how you're going to have to adjust because of what it is life has come at you with. And, you know, I meet a lot of people who have that very, very thing happen to them where they're on one track for one thing and something comes along and changes that trajectory, and all of a sudden they're doing something else with their life they had no idea they planned for. And yet at some point in their life, God said, "Hey, this is what I'm preparing you for. You think you're doing this. I'm actually going to have you do this." And life is going to be different than what they expected. So today's guest is just one of those kinds of people who thought life was going to go one way and it went the other. And they have thrived through that. They have overcome a lot of challenges, and they have seen some stuff that they didn't necessarily think they were going to see. However, they understand that life is what it is, and all they can do is face it head on. They love their family, they love their job, they love who they are, and yet they're still going to fight for what it is. My guest today has been a police officer for over 20 years. Halfway through his career, he began to sense a darkness setting in. The accumulation of exposure to danger, evil, deadly force encounters, and tragedy was taking its toll. This resulted in a self-destructive path that nearly cost him his life. And so through the help of and support of his faith, his family, his agency's peer and support chaplain program, and counseling, he was able to move to the path of healing and recovery. So there's so many different things that in life that we see, and we are going to talk to somebody today who has not only seen those things, gone through those things, but ultimately was awarded a Distinguished Service Medal by his department. And with all those things comes not just the ability that, hey, I can say I did this, but there's a newfound lens in which he looks at things with. And so before I decide to tell the whole story, I'm going to let him tell the story, and I'm going to introduce you guys to Sergeant Jason Sery. I'm sorry, Jason. I got to be able to say it, Jason Sery. And welcome to the show, sir.
Yes, thanks, Ken. Good to be here. I appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming on. This is we have mutual friends who have spoken nothing but highly of you, and so reading your bio and going through different things, I'm very interested in our conversation today, and I think that you have a lot that you can share with people, that not just your story, but the outcome of it and how they can use that to help other people as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I loved what you said, and by God's grace, I'm here. I just want to preface it with that. I'm so thankful to be here and even to share this,
Right.
Looking back, I don't even see that happening if you would have talked to me several years ago. I liked what you said in the beginning too, that you just don't know what life's going to throw at you, that there's always going to be adversity. There's always going to be circumstances and things that we have zero control over. And I think as we get older too, we realize just how little control we have over things in a sense. And kind of what, to your point is, a couple of weeks ago, my wife and I celebrated our 25th wedding anniversary. And what we've done almost since the beginning of marriage was every year of marriage, we've kind of looked back over the previous year, kind of thought through, okay, what did we think was going to happen? What actually came to fruition? And then we always kind of project out. We look ahead to that next year, that next May 23rd, and say, okay, what do we think is going to happen this next year? What are we excited about? What do we feel is kind of on the burner? What do we think God's going to do in our lives? What do we think life is going to look like?
Right.
Interestingly enough, we've been looking back and we've kind of journaled this a little bit. In 25 years, it's pretty much never gone how we thought. Never. I can't think of one year where you might have a little moment or two that actually kind of transpired, but most of the time we just know life throws enormous curveballs at us.
Right.
And sometimes it's in seasons where we have seasons of kind of more peace, and we know there's other seasons of significant adversity. And so I think looking at that and kind of moving ahead in our conversation, that's where I'd like to go is with you, is just talking about some of the adversity we face, especially as police and first responders. I'm passionate about getting this conversation out. It's one in 2022 that we still have a lot of conversation to have.
Right.
And it's exciting to have an opportunity to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's good. And I think a lot of people need to hear it. And obviously that's my opinion. However, I think with the way that the world kind of is trying to say one thing right now, whether it's media or whatever, and the actual true story of what that hero's journey is that each of us goes through is not necessarily always said. There is one person's view of it or whatever. However, you get into the thing that you say, hey, I went through this journey. I climbed this mountain myself. That's where the difference comes in. And I think that's a huge thing that people need to see, that not only are first responders, police officers, are they going through this, but they're humans going through this. They're regular people just like you and me, just like anybody else that has gone through this and has faced that dragon and is sometimes still fighting that dragon. But then I've also overcome that dragon. But not only did I have to fight that dragon, but I had to climb the mountain and get to him.
Yeah, exactly.
So, well, before we get too deep into that, who was little Jason? Who was this little guy when growing up? That what did he want to do? What was he outside doing? If he was outside doing it, who's the kid in which you are trying to honor every day that you live?
No, it's interesting, and everyone has their story, and that's why I'm always intrigued to talk to people just like you. You hear how people were brought up, you see their journey, and you see kind of what kind of changed the course of their life at different points. And for me, I grew up, I'm the oldest of four boys, and my dad was a federal health inspector, which is similar to a military career where you're moving constantly. So growing up, I moved every 3 to 4 years. And for me personally, the way I'm wired, I actually liked it. It was kind of a new adventure. My parents posed it as a new adventure. Initially, they thought I'd be an only child. So there's a pretty big gap between me and my brothers.
Oh, yeah.
My next brother in line is 6 years younger. So it wasn't like I had younger brothers I was very close to because of, that close proximity in age. It was more of, I was almost in a parental role, so to speak, because of that age gap.
Right. You had a lot of babysitting and stuff like that.
Yeah. Exactly. And growing up, I was pretty sheltered. My parents we were in a Christian household, but my mom was very, very worried about boys and violence and things like that. And so growing up, it was strange because, we couldn't have any toy guns. We couldn't play army or any of those type of things. It was always, you can go outside and build a fort or play a little bit, but nothing too crazy. And definitely you're not going to fight anyone or anything like that. And so she was very passive in a lot of ways. And I think I brought on a lot of that and kind of was developed a lot of ways, very passive growing up, but I could just sense something different in me. I just could feel that kind of yearning to, as I looked ahead and got a little older and looked ahead at what kind of jobs I wanted to do, I just knew there was no way I could go to an office or some other job where I was kind of sitting at a desk. I was thinking of all the different things that, especially as kids, think about when you're 10, 11, 12, I'm going to be an astronaut. I'm going to be a soldier. I'm going to do all these things.
Right.
And oftentimes we know as you get older, life doesn't go that way. You end up in an office or things like that. And nothing wrong with that. Even as I got into high school, I knew, I was like, man, there's no way I can do an office job. And my mom could sense that as well. And as I started to look at the military and then went into the Marine Corps, she was kind of beside herself. She wouldn't sign anything off for me when I was under 18. I had to wait till I was 18, but she and my dad signed off on it. And she's not opposed. My mom was always very, very patriotic. Mm-hmm. She just was a peacemaker, and I love it about her. Yeah. And she didn't want her son going into some dangerous career. She would much rather have him close to home in some office somewhere tucked away.
I know the feeling. I know the feeling very well. When I went into the Marines myself, it was really, my mom was very protective that way. However, my grandpa, and I've got a long line of people who had been in the military, and it was just one of those things. She grew up on military bases and everything. She understood that. She was very protective of her, of her little ones. And I wasn't always very little. So, and it's kind of goofy that, but they were good. They were good with you, knowing that you're going to go out and you're going to serve your country and you're going to be that. They just didn't want you getting shot at or any of that stuff, huh?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that was it. It was kind of one of those things where I kind of had a resolve. I think they sensed it. They could tell I was different than my brothers. They could tell I was just different even than my dad and his wiring. I just had kind of this energy to go out and kind of be hands-on and do. And that's just kind of how I was wired. And so 7 days after I graduated high school, I left for Marine Corps boot camp down in San Diego, and kind of the rest is history from that point. It was difficult. I'd never been away from home. And like I said, I led a fairly sheltered life, though we moved around a lot, and I had a lot of experiences living in different places. Mm-hmm. And meeting people. And I was accustomed to kind of that meeting new people and trying to develop relationships quickly. This was all new because now here I am, a young man, never been away, going into Marine Corps boot camp. All back in the day, it was before all the internet and everything else. Right, I'm an old guy now.
What year was it?
So this was 1993.
Oh, so 1 year before me. I was there a year after you. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. So all I had was the pamphlets you got at the recruiter would show the few, the proud and all the different guys on some of the gear and stuff. And I was like, that's what I had. That was my only context. Right. And then talking to a recruiter. So Marine,
they would show you that VHS tape with, it had, the guy that played Major Dad. They had like a recruiter. The recruiters had a videotape of him talking, and it was, and you're like, oh, and that's all you had, that, and then whatever you might see on the Discovery Channel, or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. And that was one of those things. You knew that's what appealed to you, and that was it.
Yeah.
And so when I went in, I remember, you go down there to Marine Corps boot camp, and it was a shock. And it was one of those things where it was an absolute shock to my system on all levels. But it was, interestingly enough, I loved it. There was anxiety, of course, and there's all these things, and there's expectations, and it's just a total different environment than I've ever been in. but I actually enjoyed it. I enjoyed the camaraderie. I enjoyed the discipline of just that basic training environment.
Mm-hmm.
And really, as I moved out of that, I was on the only way my parents were willing to sign off initially, because they did sign right before I went 18, was that I was on an officer candidate program. I think in my mom's mind, she thought, well, that'll be safer than if he's just a grunt on the line, you know. So it's one of those things that I got signed off, and so I went right into training, and that was my focus. I figured this is what I am going to do for my life. There was nothing else I wanted to do. I got right into some college courses and was in a reserve unit while I was in that officer candidate program, and I knew, I was like, this is my path. And a couple years into that, I had a knee injury skiing with some friends, just on a weekend. Fairly, in the big scheme of things, a relatively minor injury. Mm-hmm. But back then, it was kind of one of those things where they're like, well, you can have surgery or you can be out. And even with a doctor saying, an orthopedic specialist saying, hey, I wouldn't have surgery at 20 years old. I would try to give this some rehab. I was kind of faced with this dilemma. Do I have surgery or do I take this medical discharge and get out? Right. And I took the medical discharge and got out, and it threw my world off. You talk about probably one of the bigger times of adversity as a young man coming in, when you think you know what you're going to do and you have your sight set and you have that drive forward, and you're seeing these guys that are working these special units and things, and you're aspiring to be like that. And then it's just gone. Mm-hmm. Wow, that was my first kind of, it took me back a little bit, and I had to make some adjustments. And there was a season there. There was a season of really self-reflection, asking God, hey, what in the world? Why would you let me go through all this and have all this success in these training and get on this program and then just have it taken? What in the world's going on?
Right. On have that minor thing take it too. The smallest little thing. No, I'm very, I would say that's very similar to my story too, as well. So, you know, you just never know what's going to happen. And so you got out and you're trying to figure out what you're doing next, right?
Exactly. Got out, and now I'm thinking through, well, maybe an office job is for me. And of course, my mom was kind of thrilled that I was not there. And she's like, well, yeah, and you could do this and you could be in marketing. And she's given all these options. My dad, he was kind of like, okay, yeah, that's my mom and dad have very different personalities. My mom was very expressive. My dad, very analytical. Great relationship with both of them. My mom was just a bigger influence growing up than my dad was. And so she had a lot of things that she was kind of suggesting. By this time, my wife, Jennifer, and I, who we had met in high school, were dating. We're kind of really thinking about marriage. And so I am starting to think, man, I do need some sort of a path in a line of work. I'm going to have a wife potentially and all these things happening. But I couldn't help that nagging, burning inside of like, man, I feel my purpose is different. My calling is different. It's something service related. I just couldn't help, and I couldn't shake that feeling, and I wanted that.
Right.
And I remember a buddy of mine he's at a community college. He was kind of in this criminal justice program. He's like, I'm thinking about being a cop. And I really hadn't thought about that. I didn't know anything about police work. We have no one in our family remotely. I didn't even know any cops. I think I'd met one when I got a speeding ticket, and that was it.
Right.
But I was like, wow, okay, that kind of could be cool. And so I started looking into that, and kind of that set the course. I sensed very quickly, this is it. Yeah. And I was hesitant. I kept kind of going through my college classes for business and all those things. But I was like, nah, this is, I know where my calling is.
Right.
So you go in, so you decide that you're going to start looking at being a cop, and that's something that you hadn't really thought of, but that's what you want to do, huh?
That was, and it was one of those things where, you know, I'm still a young man. And so I was, when the discharge happened from the Marine Corps and life kind of threw me that curveball, I truly kind of tanked a little bit. I gave up on school. I was like, well, there's no point in going to school. It's kind of one of those just, you know, a little bit of a pity party, but kind of thinking through like, well, I don't know. And so once I got that focus back, and I kind of knew, okay, police work is something not only am I very interested in, but I sense it. I sense this is the direction. You get that different spark again. and I started moving through some college classes again. I started moving forward pretty quickly. And at 20 years old, here I am just trucking down the road, getting things done. Right in the middle of that kind of season of resolve of this new season ahead. Here, my mom's not feeling good. She goes in, she's got a couple things. They said, yeah, your blood work's not looking right. And all of a sudden she's diagnosed with stage 4 cancer.
Oh, wow.
No indication anything was wrong. And again, here we are, one curveball, adversity, short time later, another curveball, adversity. And as I'm here 20 going on 21, stage 4 cancer with my mom, my dad trying to process this. And now my 3 younger brothers still at home. My youngest, he was 9 at the time, just turning 10. Again, you're starting to reevaluate. Okay, should I just pause everything and just focus on family? How do I do this? How do I balance this? And so it was a really surreal time in a lot of ways, because there were exciting things happening. And there was this, okay, future path ahead. There's stuff with my future wife now. I'm thinking we're engaged, all these different things. Yet now we have this imminent kind of tragedy ahead with my mom.
Right. Yeah.
And so it was this weird thing.
Yeah. You know, it's coming. And but all you can do is face it. There's no way to head it off the past or anything like that. You just have to know that this thing is coming.
Yep.
It's got to be.
And so it was one of those, it felt like, again, you're rocking and rolling through each day on pure adrenaline. You have a million irons in the fire. And as a young guy, and kind of how I'm wired, I actually liked that. I kind of felt like, okay, I can do this. This is good. But it's accumulating, it's taking a toll on you. You're definitely fatiguing. But kind of moving forward from that, as my mom was sick, I was still going to school. I'm helping take care of things at home. I saw her become a little more agreeable to this police work stuff even. And my wife, Jennifer, she's kind of agreeable. Everyone's kind of coming to agreement. And now I'm starting to see, okay, there's some opportunities ahead. The police department I initially got hired for in Billings, Montana, they're now hiring. All of a sudden the hiring process is open. And now I'm just barely turning 21. I can apply for this.
Weird.
And so I start the application process. And again, it's so weird. It was, like I said, it's surreal, because you have so many irons in the fire at all different emotional levels. There's that excitement, there's sadness, there's fear, there's all these things. And it's every day. It's not like, oh, one day's this, one day's that. It's just like this constant, strange bouncing of emotions each day because of the circumstances life's bringing you.
Right. And so but everything was kind of lining up, pointing the way, like another arrow pointing that way and another arrow pointing that way. And everything was just kind of working towards that angle between people agreeing to it, people saying, hey, yeah, or encouraging you for it or something along those lines. It was just kind of weird that way, huh?
Yep, it was exactly. And so August 3rd, 1996, I go to my first testing for the Billings Police Department. And that was, I was sharing this at a conference recently, it was that unique era of policing. It's very different than now. There, you went into kind of an arena. They used to host them at any of the colleges or big campuses that could host it, because you would have hundreds of applicants show up for these things in the 90s. People, right. You had all this grant money. Departments were hiring like crazy. And there were a lot of people that wanted to do this job. And very different than from today, where it's like, if we can get like 20 people to show up for 10 positions, it's like, right. Holy smokes.
Yeah, it's like there was standing room only sort of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I remember showing up for this first testing, and there's literally hundreds of people there, including guys I was in the Marines with, people who I looked up to, people who when I walked in, I just felt that insecurity of, man, there's no way. There's like 5 positions, and there are literally like 500 to 700 people here testing. And a lot of these people are extremely competent people I've rubbed shoulders with, people I look up to, like I said. And so initially there was that, man, do I just call it quits? Maybe I just turn around, go walk out and do this another day. But I knew I was there to stay.
Right.
So.
Right. That's pretty cool. And I guess it's that idea that if there's all these people here and there's these people that you look up to, why would they pick me? If there's 5 positions out of these hundreds of people, why would they pick me over this guy or this girl or whatever? Because they are rock stars and I'm just a schmo. I'm just some other guy that
bags groceries or whatever. And that's it's disheartening at a certain point. But at the other side of the coin, what I'm assuming you're going to tell us next is kind of the vindication on that.
It is. And so, you go into this thing, like I said, there's that initial thought of maybe I should bounce and get out of here. But I stay the course, and they kind of set you in these groups. They have you in these sections where you're in these holding patterns, and then you'd go in and take the written test first. And you had to pass all these series of tests to move on to the next, kind of standard. But I'm seeing these groups go in and take the written tests and then come out, and immediately your test was scored. And if you didn't score, you're gone. And a lot of these folks that I looked up to, like I mentioned, are not passing and they're leaving. And it's not that these tests are crazy. We know the police test isn't that insanely hard, but I'm seeing people leave. And again, you're starting to process that. You're taking that in like, man, if they failed, whoa, okay, maybe, I don't know. But I'm like, I'm going to go in, I'm going to do my best. I prayed. I'm like, God, if you want this, you got to open this up. I walked in, and I remember walking out, handing my test to be scored, and I passed. And it was kind of like that initial reprieve. You're like, okay, that's one done, one box check done. And then you kept moving down through the day. Right. And I watched through that whole day. You watched that whole giant pool of candidates really through the series of things you had to go through, whittle down to the very final portion of the day. If you passed everything, you were going to do a physical fitness test as kind of your final of that portion. And then obviously later on, you do your background and all that stuff. But that final physical fitness portion, it was a sunny day. Obviously, it's August. I walked out onto the athletic field, and I looked around. I'm like, this is a pretty small pool now. And they've whittled a lot of people away. And I'm thinking to myself, I might have a shot at this. And so I remember just praying as I walked out there. I got on the field. It wasn't a tough physical fitness test. I had still stayed in great shape from the Marine Corps, and then just rehabbing my knee. I felt back to ready to go. And crushed that, got done. I remember the training lieutenant coming over, and I had met him before, and he was like, hey, we're looking forward to the next steps with you. Congratulations. He goes, you're one of the group that's passed and is moving on. And little did I know, in a few short months, I would be putting that uniform on and starting. I was ecstatic. Right. Here's where it gets interesting for me. And it's something I write about. It's something I speak about, is that I've got this photo of my first shift, but looking back, I look back to that day of testing on August 3rd. And what's interesting about that day for me is it's one of the most polarizing days for me emotionally. These high highs, you think of passing all those things, the fear, the anxiety even that comes with some of those testing processes. You have all that going on through a day, and then you get to this high point in the afternoon where you look around, you go, holy smokes, I made it through this. This is awesome. Right. 5 positions, 700 people or 500 people, whatever was there. And now I'm in this small group. I might have a shot at this. You're ecstatic. Then as you're driving home, I got my little truck, I'm driving home, and I'm thinking, I'm starting to kick around the excitement of that. And it starts, all of a sudden, the other part of life floods back, where I'm like, man, my mom she's on her final days. No question about it. Yeah. And so I'm thinking, well, man, I'm glad I can get home. I'm going to get home. I'm going to tell her. At this point, she was just about done. She was rail thin. I think she's like 70 pounds or something like that. She couldn't speak, but she was actually coherent sometimes, and you could actually talk to her and she'd recognize what was going on, what was being said. And I remember I got home, and she was actually in one of those moments of clarity. And I remember seeing my brothers and helping them and sharing with them. And then I went and talked to her in her hospice bed and just shared with her. I said, I passed everything, kind of told her the story that I'm telling you. And I remember she kind of smiled, nodded. I get a little emotional with this one, Ken. Sorry.
That's all right. That's all right.
I was a mama's boy. Unashamedly, I was a mama's boy. One of those things. And here I am sharing with her, and a few short hours later, she died. Oh, so, man. This is that day. This is that emotionally polarizing day. You've got your high where you're like, man, the last couple of years I've kind of reeled, or last year I've reeled from thinking I was going to be a soldier in the Marines forever, to leaving that, to going through a knee injury rehab, to testing for a police job, passing this police job, to now a death of a family member who I care about and love. And it was amazing just how I was bouncing that day emotionally. Oh, like I said, you can see this is a gazillion years ago, and it still stirs up that raw emotion in me.
Right. You're going back and forth. It's like Man, that's an absolute roller coaster of a day. I mean, that's so wow. I couldn't even imagine. I couldn't even imagine.
And so you think, that day happens, and we knew it was happening. I'm when you look back, you're kind of sometimes thankful because you know of how tragedy can strike, and you may not have anything that happens, or there's no lead up to it. It may be very sudden, and someone's taken from you very quickly.
Yeah.
Or at least I'm thankful that there was time that led up to that. I'm thankful for the moments prior to that where I actually was able to visit with her in those final moments.
Mm-hmm.
But again, here you are at this kind of crossroads now. I'm a young man. I've just passed something. I feel like there's this momentum forward to this new career. But now I'm dealing with significant grief of the death and loss of my mom. I'm seeing my dad, who is just absolutely beside himself. They'd been married a long time, and he had no idea how to cope with this. And now I've got these three younger brothers. Like I said, the youngest at that point had just turned 10. That now I feel very, very concerned for, that I've got to kind of to shepherd and care for.
Yeah, you're kind of the responsible person at this point.
Exactly. Yeah. And now I'm engaged to Jennifer. We're planning a wedding at this point and stuff. And so now we're like, okay, do we just kind of halt everything and just try to focus on some family? And for a little bit, you have to do that. You have to kind of take those steps back. And especially when I got called for, to start the backgrounds and all those things, I really had to do some serious deep thinking and praying about it and saying, okay, is this really what I should be doing right now? But at the end of the day, I really felt like, that's what we knew. Our mom, my dad's wife, we should move on. She would want us to be pursuing these things. She wouldn't want us just living in that moment. And yes, there is a grief process, but we know it's important to also know that life is there and we need to keep moving forward.
Right. And and she would have wanted you to. I can only imagine she wouldn't want you to, because she'd already encouraged you through your life to do something, do this, do that, not just wallow in her self-pity or whatever, because of, it's not what you thought was going to happen. She obviously knew that that's what she wanted you to do. And if she's raised you the way that you're saying that she has, then our job is to now go forward and encourage others and help each other and grow and continue moving on. But just the devastation knowing that you were so close, that's got to just be hard to do, because you're doing all these things now. Like you said, you're looking at getting married, you're starting a new career, you're seeing your brothers start to go through junior high and high school and all these different things, and seeing the things that they're doing. I can only imagine that you're looking back and saying, man, mom would love to see this, or whatever the case may be.
Yep, exactly. And I think you start to recognize that there are going to be a lot of things that you're going to have someone who is an important part of the family that's just not going to be present for that.
Yeah.
And there's some milestones ahead that you kind of in your own mind had thought, well, of course your family would be there for that. And we just know that that's another one of those pieces to that.
Yeah.
And so made the decision to keep moving forward and pursuing the job. And in November of 1996, I was hired, one of the 5 hired for the Billings Police, and kind of the rest is history from there. But that's where I have a photo just shortly after we did some in-house training and stuff, and I was getting ready to go with my first FTO. I've got a photo, and I keep that kind of front and center. I actually put it in some material, and I present it. But it's a photo of that first shift, and it's literally a picture of me in my family's living room. I've got friends and family, my dad and my father-in-law, future father-in-law at that point, around me. My youngest brother's there, and they had just spent some time. We had dinner together. They prayed for me. They kind of just were encouraging me on this next part of my journey. And this is about 2 hours before I start my very, very first shift. And I was going to work graveyard 9 p.m. to 7 a.m. And I was absolutely ready to go. And I love that picture because not only is it a picture, it reminds me of all the things that led up to that, and really looking back and thinking through, okay, here, there were curveballs, there was adversity that came in, but you made it to that shift, and God still blessed that path to get there. But I like that too, because now that I launched forward, like this fall will be 26 years since that picture was taken. I think through, okay, what's happened? Similar to how we started our conversation today, what's happened each year? Yeah. What are the things I thought were going to take place that didn't, and so forth. And I think when I look at that, and I kind of move into the few months after that first shift, someone, when I was presenting, asked kind of about their first shift, that they had a word to describe it. And I loved what they said. They said unprepared. And I would absolutely latch onto that, because you think you're prepared. You think, I've got some training. I feel this calling. I feel this wiring. I'm ready to go. I'm young. I'm fit. I'm ready to rock and roll and get into this new job. Everything's new and exciting. You, in short order, realize just how little you know about this job.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely.
So,
I can recall my first one very vividly. And I was with a temporary field training officer, because mine was gone that day. So I got a brand new one. It was 2 days after I'd gotten out of the academy. And well, I'll take that back. I graduated on a Friday and I started on Sunday. So, one day. Honestly. And I remember the sergeant saying, okay, everybody get around. Here's what we're going to do. We got a tip that there's a wanted murderer, got warrants for him. He's at this apartment complex. We're going to go. And he sets up a plan for it. And he goes, we're going to go get him. I mean, it's easy knock and talk, no problem. He doesn't even know. And we're like, okay. And then they point to me, you're going to be on the front. You're going to be, I was like, what? I just got to, and I'm standing on the door. I'm on one side of the door. Another officer's on the other side of the door. He's doing all the talking, but I'm right there. And my leg was shaking so bad. I was so scared to death for whatever reason. And this guy, he was taking his time getting out, because he's like, all right, yeah, fine, I'll turn myself in. But what he did in the meantime, between saying that and actually turning and then coming out of the door, he took a shower, he cleaned himself up, he came out smelling like, like a Axe body spray factory. He comes out, I mean, he was just totally dressed up. As much as a murderer can dress up. I mean, he had a button-down shirt, and it was 2 sizes too big for him, that type of looking stuff. But it was that whole thing. I remember just being scared to death on that one, and to where people were getting called in and all this different stuff. And I was like, is this normal? No, this isn't normal. This is, it's like, but that was my first thing, is just being scared to death, sitting on a door, not knowing, this isn't a scenario anymore. I'm actually doing this. And then when I go home, I remember telling my grandpa, he passed away not too long after that. And I said, oh yeah, first day was, we captured a wanted murderer. And he was ecstatic. He's like, yes, that's how you do it. And he was,
yes.
So it was just weird, just one of those weird days that I look back now and I said, well, that could be a Thursday, that could just be an any day for me. But for him,
and that's exactly it. You don't know, you have no idea. And I think that's what a lot of us, including how you're describing it, that's what we've loved about this job, is this kind of switching gears, how you just have no idea what a day is going to hold.
Right.
And it's that unknown, and those, going from the mundane to excitement that we love. And I think that was a huge appeal to it. And again, you look at those first shifts, you think back to your first shift and what's transpiring there. And I look at my first shift and the first week ahead, everything's so new. I was telling a group just this week, I said, I didn't even know what a warrant arrest is. I'm like, well, I've heard of warrants. Okay. Right. People have warrants. Well, what does that mean?
Right.
I was that brand new to this job.
Yeah.
And some people are like, you should have researched it better. You didn't know anything about it. Well, maybe, but I love it. And so it's like one of those things that everything's new, everything's exciting. But again, you look back we were incredibly unprepared. And especially back in that era of policing, when you started, there were a lot of old school cops. We had a lot of Vietnam veterans that were cops. These are tough cops. They had come through some very significant times themselves. But this is now, we're at that kind of time where things are shifting. You're getting technology in that we've never had before to help with the job. You're having lots of case law start to kind of manifest, and that we're operating very differently than someone did 10, 15, 20 years prior to that.
Right.
And so it's a unique time. And so you think about it, as us as new cops, we're inundated with every single facet of this job, but I loved it. Right. As I got into it, I'm like, yes, this is it. I love it.
Because you didn't know what you didn't know.
Exactly.
And somebody comes up and you're like, what's that? Like, oh, this is something we've been doing. You're like, really? That's a thing?
I didn't see
Yeah,
that on whatever movie I watched, or because
exactly.
and like I said, all we knew was what we saw on maybe Cops or on 60
Hmm.
Minutes or on Discovery Channel. We didn't
Yep.
know until you get in there, and then you start, hey, I'm gung ho. Settle down there, Sparky. Here's what we do.
Yes.
Here's how we do it. And you're like, well, really? That's the yeah, because you don't know what you just don't know. And so
No.
the more you learn it, like you said, there's the excitement of opening a brand new present on Christmas morning every single day. You're like, oh, that's a thing, we can do that. Or oh, I made this break in this case, or I got someone to admit or consent or do whatever. And now you're getting
Hmm.
confessions, and cases are getting opened and closed, and you're feeling pretty good about yourself.
Yeah.
Right.
No, you are, and it's interesting because you have so much information coming in. You're on this sensory overload, and I was living on sheer adrenaline. I was working, my FTO had Tuesday through Friday 10-hour shifts, and so we were working 9 p.m. to 7 a.m. I would sleep for a few hours. I'd get up. I was finishing courses at Montana State to finish my degree, and so I'd go to school in the daytime and then right back into it during the week, and then just try to catch up on sleep on the weekends and help the family and all these other things. Interesting, like I said, I'm doing all that, and there's still this grief process going on in our family dynamic,
Right.
planning a wedding, all these other things. And so I was even sharing recently, even my dreams, I remember back then, were so strange. They were so cop-like, and there was police dreams because it was all new. And again, running kind of that sheer adrenaline for at least the first couple weeks to a month, where you just you feel like you're going, but again, loving it.
Right.
Talking about, and all of us, you hear, cops from back then, we were like, yeah, I would have done it for free and all those things. And I was kind of like, I would do this job for free type thing.
Right. Yeah.
Back then, because you don't, like you said, you don't know what you don't know. Everything's new, everything's exciting. Again, unprepared. And I think when I look back, what I was unprepared the most for was the excitement and the adrenaline. I think I was kind of prepared for that. We had seen that, like you mentioned, you saw shows like Cops or on 60 Minutes or something else, and you were excited. You knew there was going to be adrenaline dumps. There were chases, and those were there, and those were fun. It was the dark side of the world, the brokenness of our world that I was unprepared for.
Yes.
Seeing the things that most members of our society never are exposed to. They see TV shows or movies, and they see some of those things. But then when we see it in real life, and we see not only in real life, it has kind of a distinct kind of environment to it. When you think of the visuals, the sights, the smells, the feelings, the senses, all those senses of going on these scenes and seeing these dark things and hearing these dark things, those are there. But like I've shared with many, it's the aftermath of some of those events where we see how it affects the lives of everyone else that this circumstance or incident encompass, that I was absolutely unprepared for, especially when you're talking about deaths, when you're talking about not only the violent deaths with a homicide or something like that, but all the way to a suicide, to all those things. And those kind of processes of aftermath, those were significant. And those are the things that kind of took me back and made me the most unprepared. I had no way of knowing that was a part of it. And of course I should have known that. Of course you're going to know these things happen, but until you really face those things and you're in that environment day after day, and these things become kind of commonplace in our jobs, you just have no context for that. At least I didn't. I know other people have it, growing up different environments. I just had no context for that. That wasn't the world I'd ever lived in. And so in short order, I went from a fairly naive guy. I had my time in the military, so I wasn't like just sitting under my parents' roof my whole life. But I went from kind of shorter, from being in high school to just a few years later in an environment being exposed to things that I had no concept or clue were really going on a daily basis.
Right. And it's funny, you said that, talk about the aftermath and stuff. You might see something, you might even see some of the worst of people or the worst environments or whatever. And you get done, you go write your report, you go do all whatever, whether you put somebody in jail or whatever, and you move on to the next thing, and you're doing your job. You go to your house, you go to all this stuff. And then maybe 6 months later, you're going back. You either drive past that house that you were at before, or you have to go to another call there, and you see nothing's changed. Or and you're asking yourself,
you guys saw the horror that occurred. How are you not changing, your lifestyle or whatever? And it's not because they don't care. It's because that's the environment in which they live and they know, and they don't know that they don't know another way. That's, and not to say that they're bad or good or whatever. It's just that's the world that they live in, and that you have a hard as me, I guess I have a hard time, sometimes looking at that and not being judgmental because I think of this or that or the other thing. And it's a constant struggle that I have to do to say, hey, you're not better than anybody. You're not, just because they live in, this environment and it's dirty or it's criminal ridden or whatever, doesn't mean that you're better than them. That just means that they live in a different world than you at certain times. You might all go to the same grocery store, but you go back to your worlds, and they choose to live like that. But you can't judge them. You can try to help them, and that's the best that you can get.
Yeah, that's 100% true. And I think all of us have experienced those emotions where you're like, you're feeling kind of judgmental towards someone, but again, it's just saying, okay, well, I'm going to do my job and I'm going to kind of box this up, and that's them, and you move on. And I see that kind of, adds into some of the cynicism that oftentimes comes into our profession and in the lives that are working there. But again, you in those first couple years of work, you see that, and that's all new to you. Like you said, you're going to these same calls, but that's for a 6, 10, 15-year cop. They're like, yeah, that happens all the time. But in those first couple of years, especially, everything's so new. These even routine, oh, I'm going back to that house again. It's still got kind of that, okay, that's what we do. And so again, these things are kind of still being processed. And I love that part of it. Those first couple of years, again, were so encouraging. And working for Billings here in Montana, it was an extremely busy department. It's where I'm at right now recording this with you. And just talking to some of my brothers who still work here, it's a very busy place. And so in 2.5 years that I worked there initially, I was exposed to so many different things. And kind of eventually from there, I was looking around. I think, as a young man, a lot of stuff going on. I still kind of scratch my head a little bit of why I left, but we know that life again brings different opportunities and circumstances. And I had some different opportunities to look at some other bigger places. And I decided at that point, I went over to the Portland Police Bureau. I applied with Portland. That had been one of my dad's duty stations, so I was familiar, had a context for Portland. But I had also looked at several other areas. It was one of those that my wife and I had taken a trip there. She was kind of familiar with. And I think part of it was like, as we've just kind of gone through a lot of events with family stuff and a wedding and things, I think part of it was this draw to start our own lives and kind of just disconnect a little bit. And right or wrong, that's where we were at. Right. And Portland was one of those places. It was offering lateral transfers. It was one of the only agencies in the nation, and they had a really tight hiring pool because they also required a bachelor's degree. And so when I applied for that, I was surprised. I went to the test site, and it wasn't like my first police job. There was actually very few applicants testing for these lateral positions. And in short order, I got hired out here in the Northwest, and we made the move. I'm 23 years old, making the move out to this city that I have I hadn't lived in since I was a kid, and and starting this job out here in a city environment, a new agency. But what I found in short order, there were twofold things that I loved. One, and it's something I've always loved about this job, and I've been drawn to. I think one of the best things about our profession is that camaraderie. Yeah. That as you develop this relationship, it doesn't matter where you go, that camaraderie, that bond of doing this profession is there. And in short order, friendships happen and that camaraderie is there. And so I love that. And then two, police work is absolutely police work wherever you go. Whether you're in a giant city or a small, tiny department, at some point, if you work long enough, you're going to be exposed to all the same things. Yes, we know some of the other places, there's places that have many incidents every single day, and there's places that have very few. But again, police work is police work in the sense that the brokenness of the world just permeates everywhere in our society. Right. And we're the ones responding to that. And it doesn't matter where you're at, you're going to respond to that. And so the job itself was really was really unchanged. As I started in Portland, it was really no different as far as what you're doing than I was doing the last 2.5 years prior.
Yeah, because it's there's an old saying that I would say all the time was people are people are people are people, and it's
Yes.
and that's basically what you're doing is you're dealing with people. That's what police work is. It's human nature. It's people that you're dealing with, and not only are you dealing with people, but you are people. And so you go into an emotionally charged situation, what because of a domestic or whatever. You are a person who has emotions also, whether you're pushing those down at the time or whatever the case is. People are people, and we're all the same way. We just have to have a bigger view and say, okay, here's the big picture. Here's what we need to be looking at. Here's the goal that we need to be trying to reach. And what you're doing right now does not attain this goal. And the goal is keeping peace, not hurting each other, not killing each other, not taking from each other. Basically, the same things you learn in kindergarten. And we have to kind of hold on to that knowledge and share that with other people. And so when you get with people, you start learning that, hey, we're all the same. And now you can even relate to some people because of, hey, you're going through this. Let me tell you, I went through it too. Oh, your family member's sick and they're close to dying. Well, I can tell you, I know exactly what you're feeling. And so now you have empathy. You have a similar situation that they can relate to, and you can now build a relationship from that. And I think that's another reason what we're meant to do here. And that's how we deal with people. And that's how we help people, is that you build relationships so you can speak into their lives.
Yeah. No, and that's exactly it. It's just, again, that's going to be unchanged. And as I look at this next generation of cops coming up, that's, again, those things, they're going to face those exact same things. People are people. You're going to be in those same circumstances. The job, though it changes at a number of levels, it's still responding to all these different things and dealing with things in a manner that we've kind of always dealt with.
Yeah.
And
so you move over to Portland. Obviously there's a difference. There's a couple differences, whether it's technology or uniform color or, whatever the case, the type of car and that sort of thing. But getting the job and doing the job and going out and working with people, that's the same. And was there some growth potential? Was there a specific reason that you just, other than, we need to go write our own story? Or was there more that said, hey, this seems like something we really want to do, and let's go ahead and tackle this way?
Yeah, I think, when we looked at places to go, I think there was a big part of that personal life is having that own story and developing your own story. Again, looking back, when you get a little further down the road, you go, man, maybe we should have just hung out and stayed where we were. But we know that that's not how life is, and you don't look back. I don't look back and just kind of regret all that by any means. I think we do have things we would change if we look back on things, but I don't dwell there. I look ahead. Okay, this is where we're at today. But I think one of the other things when you're a young cop, and especially as you're starting to get your sea legs under you and you're moving forward, you get a couple years on. It's so funny. You get a couple years on, you really think, man, I know what I'm doing now. 2-3 years on, and you feel like you got the world by the tail, and you're like, I'm ready to go. And there were limited opportunities with Billings being a little smaller department of moving into some of the areas that I was really interested in, as some of the drug units and some of the detective work and those type of things, where these larger agencies, because of their size, just had that as kind of almost their sales pitch and recruiting pitch, was that, yeah, you come work for us and then you're going to have all these different opportunities in short order. And as a young man, you're kind of thinking, well, yeah, I don't want to just work 10, 15 years before I have any other opportunities. I want to have opportunities to go do these other things. And so that was an initial draw, especially with some of the drug unit stuff, because it was exciting work. There were a lot of interesting cases and dynamics to it. And so when we went there, as I got into the job, I started working with some different police partners, and I'm loving it. When I was working for Portland, absolutely loving it. The different partners I got to work with, just phenomenal human beings, phenomenal cops, and just rubbing shoulders with very top solid men and women of the profession. I felt like every day I was learning from them. I was aspiring to be like many of them, and just enjoying all the aspects of the job. with these folks.
There you go.
And moving into this job, I started working with these different partners, and we're rocking and rolling. We're out there every day doing our job, serving the community, taking criminals off the street, getting guns and drugs and all those things that were a part of policing that I just loved every single day. And what's interesting is you think about it, when we're doing our jobs, especially street work, and I've been a street cop my entire career, other than 3.5 years I spent as the training division sergeant, my entire career has been out on the street, and I've loved it. And that's actually by choice, because it's just, I've loved the unknown, like we've talked about. I love the switching of the gears. You just don't know what's next. And that's where I was when I came to Portland. As I started working with different partners and in some different units, I started just loving the unknown of every day. Every day was filled with excitement. And that's where you're operating in that very hyper-vigilant state. You're right out there, you're operating very high. There's routinely that adrenaline and cortisol and all those different hormones are dumping in your system at different points. And you're operating, 10, 12, sometimes longer hours a day regularly.
Uh-huh.
And I actually loved that. I looked forward to that. I felt very sharp. I felt like I was improving my skills every day. I felt like I was making a difference in the communities. I was doing all the things that I had aspired to do in police work. And what I didn't recognize is I was, even from the start working in Billings, I was starting to develop these very bad cycles of behavior where I was so enthralled with the newness of the job initially, and now I'm enthralled with the job itself because I'm competent in it. At 6-7 years on as a cop, you feel pretty good. You're working with competent people. You're competent in your job. You feel confident in what you're doing every day. Mm-hmm. And so operating at that high level is exciting. It feels like the right space. Interestingly enough, we know the physiology of our body, even though we can operate at those levels oftentimes for long periods of time, at some point, your body has to come back to that baseline and rest and get stable again.
Right.
And I wasn't recognizing that at all. And interestingly enough, right around that time, as I'm developing these cycles of behavior where I'm really kind of almost dopamine chasing every day, and I'm operating in that high space, and I'm trying to come down to baseline, at 3 a.m, and I can feel myself starting to crash. I'm not putting 2 and 2 together. Interestingly enough, Dr. Kevin Gilmartin's book, Emotional Survival for Law Enforcement, comes out 20 years ago this year. And one of my sergeants gave it to me and my partner to read. Mm-hmm. And I remember reading through that and skimming it and reading through some of the different areas and thinking to myself, this is really good material. But where I was in my life and in my career, really none of it, even though I was in those cycles he's talking about in the book. Right. I had no context for that other than what I was reading there. And in fact, I was in a lot of just like denial of, that's not me. I'm not in that cycle. I have other things. I've got my faith. I've got all these other activities. I'm doing all the things that other people don't do. So I'm mitigating it that way and really put the book on the shelf. See you later. I'm going to be back on to the next chase, the next case, that type of thing.
Right.
So that was kind of that cycle. And it was interesting because that was that cycle where, again, I'm loving that hypervigilant state that I'm in, but it was right about that time that I started to notice that I would dip below that baseline coming home, especially from work. So here it is, 2:33 a.m. I'm driving back from the precinct, and though I'm not connecting the dots, maybe consciously, I can sense something's off. And what it was is my body's coming back down. I've been on that roller coaster ride so many years now, so many shifts, that it's not able to get back to that stable point as well. And there's days where it's just not able to maintain that stability that it needs to rest. And I remember the first sign of it showing up when I'd go home, and I'm thankful it wasn't anything else, but I'd go home and I would just crave waffles. I would crave Eggo waffles.
Really?
And 2:33 a.m, here I am slathering a 4-stack of these frozen waffles I've put in the toaster with peanut butter or maple syrup or whatever else. And I would just be eating these every single night after shift. And again, I've shared this before with other groups. I didn't crave a steak or salad or a sandwich or anything like that. I just wanted waffles. what I wasn't connecting is, I mean, we think about what the contents of that is. It's not a nutrient dense food. It's a
right. Even if you
very,
get the,
very just terrible food.
yeah, even if you get the multi-grain or the whatever, you're still
Exactly.
getting cardboard junk. Yeah.
Exactly. But my
Yeah.
body craved it because it knew that's what I needed to just get me to that stable point, so I didn't crash. Now we know, looking back now and knowing kind of how this operates and seeing a lot of the other journeys of cops I've been close with, others go to alcohol, others go to sleeping medications and other things to try to mitigate some of these same effects to get them to that stable point.
Right.
I'm thankful in my life it was Eggo waffles, but it should have been an indicator, and I wasn't picking up on it, that there was something off. And what was off, again, was that because I was throwing my entire life and identity into this job and operating in such a high level every day and not allowing my body rest, I was developing a terrible cycle of behavior that was hurting me.
Right. Yeah. And it's weird. You don't even think about how what you're doing has a detrimental effect on you. You think, hey, I'm just doing whatever. I find this to be comforting because I know I do stuff that's stressful or whatever. And this is good. I know it's Eggo waffles. It's not, I'm not, drinking to blacking out or whatever, or I'm not having a beer or whatever before I go to sleep. I'm having Eggo waffles. What's the difference? And it's safe. And I know it's not necessarily bad for me, in the grand scheme of things, health wise. Yeah, maybe, but you're looking at it that you don't realize how cyclical you've become, that you have nothing else going on. You're just now checking boxes to get through your day, as opposed to producing anything. I mean, you're consuming and you're not producing. And what are you contributing to other than just being a pulse on a human that checks a box?
Yep.
And I think
that's exactly it.
Yeah.
So that was kind of that cycle I was in. And again, I knew, looking back, I can even remember sensing something was off, but not quite understanding what it was at all. Even with some of the knowledge, like I said, we can get knowledge, we can read books, we can hear from people, but sometimes we're just, until we actually go through it, we don't really have it resonate. Yeah. And so that was kind of that cycle I was in. And so I just kept plowing forward and moving forward and enjoying kind of that aspect of the job of going there, to where, again, I was in a weird state of mind where I really hated even going on vacation. I felt like I was missing out. If my partner was still working, he'd be assigned to someone else. They'd be doing something. I'd be constantly checking in with them. Terrible behaviors. Right. And I know not every cop's like that. I know a lot of cops have been able to disconnect better. I wasn't able to do that. I just was, especially young in my career, I was so excited about the job and felt so called to it that I didn't want to leave aspects of it. And I had a very, very difficult time breaking free, even on my weekends, and trying to disconnect my mind from the job. And that was even with, like I said, it wasn't that I didn't have anything else going on. I was married. We had other activities. I had friendships outside the job. But even with that, I was still consumed by aspects of the job in a very unhealthy way.
Right. I know guys that they're young, they're within their first 6 years of work, and they work graveyard. You send an email out, and they're replying to your email at any time during the day when they're supposed to be sleeping, knowing they just got off work and but they're still replying to emails when they should be sleeping. Yeah. And you're like, what are you doing? Oh, I just, I saw the email. I don't care.
Exactly.
Ignore that thing. You sleep. Don't drink. Yes. Don't drink all the time as soon as you get home to go to sleep. You need to sleep, and you need to get your mind away from this place and not sign up for all the overtime you can get. And nobody else is going to do it. Doesn't matter. You need to take care of yourself and shut down from this place.
No, and that's exactly it. And that's very tough for many cops to do, especially, like you said, when we're new in our career and when things are new and we enjoy the job, it's very difficult to do. And again, I think part of it is that the era of policing that we're in, when we got into it, we didn't have any context to this job, like I said, for one, and then we didn't have any understanding of any of these cycles of behavior, how we would cope with things. Again, what I didn't recognize is all these things were there, but what was contributing to it as well is, like I said, this broken part of the world that we see regularly. That's affecting us. We know when you start looking at how trauma affects the brain and how you vicarious trauma and all these terms that if you look in psychology of how it affects our brains, those things are there. And for year after year, those are adding up. And for kind of our generation of cops, we had no context of how that was truly affecting our brain.
Right.
And then secondarily affecting our bodies and our emotional and our spiritual health, all those things interconnected. Because when we thought of being healthy on the job and staying well in our job, it was siloed to physical fitness. I joke about it. I've got actually a picture of it, and I show it in a presentation I do, is that the first police department I had in Billings here, in the gym, had this giant poster by the U.S. Marshals, and it was this picture of the back of this ex-con doing these lap pull downs with enormous amount of weight, and he's this big beastly dude, and it says, ex-con, Department of Corrections, or whatever it says on there. And it says, every day you're not working out, someone else is, and that was our definition of wellness and resiliency, whatever these terms you want to tag it.
Right.
Back in the day, it was all your physicality, and it was, you have to be big, you have to be stronger, you have to be physically fit to go and deal with all these violent criminals and these bad situations. 6-7 years into my job, I'm starting to feel that, okay, I've done that. I've worked out, I've been strong, but there's something else there. There's something else accumulating. And my first symptom of that is there after these shifts, and my coping mechanism becomes ego waffles. But again, I'm not connecting those dots.
Right.
There's stuff accumulating, all these critical incidents that we're exposed to, all this darkness. We're just boxing up, just like we were told, hey, you gotta emotionally lock that down, box that away. And it's there on a shelf. And at 6-7 years, there's a lot that's already accumulated when you've been doing the job.
Right. Because I mean, and yes, I think people should be working out. Absolutely. I agree with that. However, you can't make that the only thing you're doing, because what happens when you have to start dealing with, child sex stuff, little kids that have been hurt or murdered or whatever the case is, or you start having to deal with, you go to crashes and there's just, you have to go deliver death notifications. You start seeing the human side and the horrible. You can be as big and burly as you want, and I get it. There's a time that you need to put off that. You need to send the message that I'm not going to be an easy target if you are wanting to kill the cop. Yes, I'm all for that. However, there's also a side where you need to be able to take it down several notches so you can be that voice of care and compassion for the person who's just lost the family member that you are delivering that message to. You have to be that person and they don't want the Hulk smashing through their door and saying, your family member, you don't need that. You need the person that's going to show that. And that's why you need to be both sometimes. But I agree. You can't put one on the shelf and you just focus on the one thing all the time. And that makes a huge difference.
Yeah, these things, and like you said, it makes a huge difference. And as you go through and you're exposed to a lot of those events, like you even just described, by 6 or 7 years on the job, you're going to have seen most of those things, if not all of them. No matter where you're at, wherever you work, you're going to have those things there now. And what I didn't recognize is that in my mind, my greatest adversary was the unknown of the street, the person that's going to be my opponent there, that encounter you might have. All those things related to officer safety and tactics and everything else. What I wasn't recognizing is at that point, the greater adversary was that what was occurring inside me. It was that accumulation of all those things that I was not dealing with in a proper manner, these coping cycles that I was in, these behavior cycles I was in that were very destructive, and I had no context for it and recognition. And again, because when you're young and when you're just driving forth, it is very easy to just keep rocking and rolling through a day and boxing that stuff and putting it away, and not even for a second believing that'll ever come back around to haunt you. And that was kind of the thing that I again, talking about being unprepared, had no preparation or understanding. Even like I said, even after reading Emotional Survival for Law Enforcement, I just, again, my context that I was working in, it didn't translate. There wasn't a resonation of that in my mind.
Yeah. Are you familiar with Betsy Brantner Smith?
Yes. Yep.
So I've had her on here, and if you're trying to remember, where do I know that name? She was on, about 10 plus episodes ago. anyway, she was talking about, and I've heard her talk about your brain. It's like every single time you go through one of those things, you see some kind of major incident like that. You get there's a cut. There's this little scratch or cut on your brain, in that general area. And then you get enough of those, all of a sudden, if it keeps cutting in that, there's now an injury as opposed to just a little flesh wound, right? So you can't just put a Band-Aid on it. Maybe the first one you could put a Band-Aid on and it goes away and that's the non-police officer. But the police officer sees so many in their lifetime that now that can become an injury. That's where PTSI comes from. And so you have enough of those, then you start getting, not only do you have PTSI, now you have PTSD, because now you're having a disorder because things aren't working the way they're supposed to. And so that's exactly what it seems like to me that you're describing, that you have 100 little cuts. And if you don't deal with them, things aren't going to work the way they need to be dealt with, and they're not going to work right.
Exactly. And that's just it is when you look at the brain, and as I've kind of been able to study this now after my journey, it is interesting. Just like you said, it is kind of death by 1,000 cuts, so to speak. That's exactly what's occurring. Right. And when you look at not only us as cops being exposed to critical incidents, which we do regularly, and I've seen some of the studies of in a career, it's anywhere from like 188 to up into several hundreds, depending on where you work and how your career has taken a path and how long that you're exposed to, versus the 4 to 10 that a normal person might see in their lifetime.
Right.
I mean, we're exposed to much of this. The other part of that, though, is that vicarious or secondary trauma. As we're going to these scenes, and we might not be exposed to the actual event this person went through that was a critical incident, we're now having to relive it by taking witness statements, detailed witness statements, doing investigative reports into these things, and seeing the aftermath, like I've talked about.
Right.
All those things are traumatic for the brain.
Right.
You couple that then with some of these moments of this acute stress, where it's that very stressful, harmful instant. Like you said, there was that injury comes in, that PTSI injury comes in. All these things are a part of our career. And again, going back kind of what we were talking about earlier, all these things are things that just, it's strange to me in 2022 that we're even still having this conversation, that it's one of those that we're still not fully recognizing and gaining traction of how much damage we take in a protracted amount of time in this career.
Right.
It's there.
Right. And it's kind of funny that we don't look at that like that. And as we go through things, we're just trying to, I'm trying to muddle through, and I'm trying to get through it, because like you said, we take those witness statements, we do all these different things. Not only do we have to hear what everybody says and what everybody saw, then we have to go document it. And in which case we are now reliving it again by documenting the whole thing. And then not only do we do that, then if we ever have to go to court on it, we have to relive by rereading, rewatching video, redoing all of our stuff, so we're prepared for court. And then we have to go and resubmit it again to a whole new group of people, the jury and whoever, and look at all the parties involved and see the look on their face as they're reliving it.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of sides to a police officer living through these traumatic events over and over and over again, when majority of people, they live it once, maybe twice if they have to go to court on it. But the police officer, they have to go through it. And then somebody pops it up as, oh, hey, that's some kind of perfect training video. And this is what we're going to show. We're going to show this training thing. And now the guy's like, that's me. Thanks. Now I got to live through it again.
Yeah.
And
it's interesting because we all go through that as cops. What we do is our brain, our body, we have to cope with that at some point. And there's no way you're going to cope with it at some level. And typically, sadly, we develop these negative cycles. We develop these negative coping mechanisms. And that's why you see a lot of the injuries translate into cops going through really rough times, and cops, again, seeing the suicide rate of police officers is astounding. It typically outpaces line of duty deaths. And that's the extreme. That's the person that got to that extreme event of taking their own life. Right. Everyone else is behind that in some place on that spectrum of the damage they're taking going through that. And typically what the biggest gap is just not understanding, again, like we've talked about, how this is truly affecting us with those little cuts like you described, but also how to effectively develop good coping and recognize when we've developed bad coping mechanisms. And that's what I didn't recognize. I didn't recognize these negative coping skills. I didn't have any context towards it. I didn't have any thought process to it. Mm-hmm. And again, it's adding up, it's accumulating. And the best thing I could do is when I experienced something terrible, when I saw the darkness of this world, something broken, something terrible and tragic, is to box it up, lock it down initially, especially while I had to do my job. But then later, never revisiting that. Maybe Jennifer and I would talk briefly about it, or I would share it with another brother or sister in blue, but then we would put that on the shelf and leave that on the shelf. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what moved me forward to down the road, 12, 13 years into my career, where all those events that I had packaged up nice and neat and put locks on were starting to weigh heavy. And it's interesting because this started showing up, and I was sharing this the other day, is that I had Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays off for almost my whole career by choice. We got kind of used to it. Initially, when you're a rookie, you just have those days off. But our family kind of got used to having that middle of the week schedule, and it felt normal to us. And because I don't like a whole lot of change, I like routine because our job is all change all the time, it seems like. Yeah. I like my schedule. And so I remember, though, on Tuesday, about halfway through my career, starting to feel this twinge of something that I had never, ever felt before. And I've described it as darkness. It was probably, if you wanted to give it a clinical definition, it was depression. And that's where it was showing up. And it was interesting because this was so counter how I was wired. And I've shared already, as we've visited this morning, some of my upbringing and story. Part of the way I was resilient is just because I've been able to adapt to change, moving and meeting new people and going through a family member's death. While you're doing this, I just would drive forward, and I kind of had this resolve, and my faith as a Christian so strong that I was like, okay, I got this. I can move through it. Right. And I had never felt, we all have days where we feel down or we feel kind of like, oh, that was a bad day. Right. But I'd never felt this feeling. It was this dark feeling, and it was showing up. It first showed up on my first day off. And actually, Dr. Gil Martin talks about that in his book, that's pretty common. Again, I had no remembrance of that. This was 6-7 years after I read that book even. Right. And so I'm just thinking, man, that's weird. And, you start going, oh, I'm getting older. And that was, oh, well, okay. Yesterday was kind of a rough day at work. And you kind of just, you try to rationalize it or deal with it in a very logical, well, that's probably what this is manner. But it was frightening because it was an unfamiliar feeling to me. It was something that seemed so out of the norm and out of the context of who I was overall as a person. But I couldn't shake it in the sense that was real and that was there. And I was committed to going, okay, well, here's what I'll do. I'll just change my workouts, change my diet, just get through this week. But it started to show up on Tuesday mornings regularly. Every single week. Wow. Okay. And that's where I started to kind of get almost a little panicky, like, okay, something's up. So I would have guys over on Tuesdays. I would have something else going on Tuesday mornings to try to offset that feeling, to try to kind of box that and push it away. Mm-hmm. Yet it would persist. And as time went on, it persisted into the afternoon. Then it started to move into Wednesdays and Thursdays, and it became heavier and heavier. This darkness was there. It was starting to feel crushing at times. Right. And I was doing everything under the sun to try to mitigate that by working out more, like I said, eating right, doing other activities, and not deal with what that emotion or feeling was. Just kind of locking it down, saying, okay, that's there, but I'm going to get through this. I'm going to do my resolve like I always have. I'll pray about this and I'll move forward and resolve to go forward and continue my path. Mm-hmm. And it was not working. And it was starting to get so severe that all 3 days off, I was having to consciously make an effort to hide this from anyone that was involved in my life. I had to put on that facade of this happy face and, hey, I'm the old Jason that oh, I'm good. Everything's fine. Hey, let's go do this, and kind of have that kind of persona that I thought I needed, but it was all an act to try to conceal and cover up this darkness that I was facing.
Right.
And it got so bad that it was starting to show up. I would get off work at 9 p.m. I was on the schedule 11 to 9. I would get off at 9 p.m. on Monday nights going into my weekend. And almost immediately as I would drive home from the shift, I could sense it starting to kind of set in.
It's creepy.
And
wow.
And the only reprieve I was getting at that point then was during kind of some significant physical activity, because we know there's all the endorphins and everything else that kind of drops during physical activity that you get a Band-Aid.
Right.
And then when I'd go back to work, when I would go back to work on Fridays, I felt good. And the whole work week was just good. And so that was kind of right there halfway through the career. And again, it was frightening, because I was frightened to even call it what it was, depression or anything like that, because all my thoughts were of how negative of a connotation that is. We all see people on the streets that are facing some sort of a mental illness or battling this. And I didn't want to be like that. I didn't want to have any context in my mind that I could be in the same path as someone that I deal with on the street. And so I was committed to absolutely telling no one about this.
Yeah, and it's kind of weird that you think that when you're telling that story, I'm thinking of just that darkness creeping in, and the only thing that's bringing it out is the fact that you're moving forward, trying to stay away from it. It just creeps forward. And a couple episodes ago, I had a gentleman named Brandon Griffith on, and he talked about how his heart had stopped and he was dying, and he just saw darkness coming in on the corners, on the edges of his vision. Just the darkness was coming in, and he just saw his lights were shutting off, and because blood was leaving his body. And that whole idea was that he was dying at that moment. And it's so weird that when you tell that story, that's almost a similar thing, that there's just darkness coming in until you're able to pull yourself out by having that go forward, go fast moment just to stay ahead of it. But it's constantly there, and it comes back to you. And that's so weird to hear about that.
It is. And it was getting worse and worse. It just kind of felt consuming. And again, part of me said, hey, I'm a man of faith, and I have a strong relationship with God, and I need to just power through this. My faith will get me through. My family will get me through. But those things weren't happening. Those things weren't helping the way I thought they should help.
Right.
Now, I believe they were there, and those things were happening and helping. And again, I don't believe without God's hand in this and my family's support would we even be having this conversation. But at the time, it felt all consuming, and it felt like it was getting worse and worse and worse. It got so bad that by the time I promoted to sergeant, I've actually got a picture of it. I'm being sworn in. I'm with family. I'm smiling. I'm happy. I look at that picture of me swearing in, which should be one of your kind of high points in your career. You've got to a point where now you're entering a new role, a supervisory role. There's a lot of leadership and professional aspects to it that I was excited about. When I look at that photo, I am in one of the darkest places of my entire life. As I have a smile on my face, as I am at this high point in my career, so to speak, I am literally inside just imploding. I have the darkest feelings of depression and despair going on. And again, as now I'm moving into this role, this role that I need to be a leader and serve these others that I'm responsible for on a shift, and have all these aspects, I am committed more than ever before to never ever sharing this with anybody, to locking this down, to saying, you know what, this is real, this will be a part of life, but I cannot share this with anyone. The stakes are too high. My mind goes to, if I told anyone about this, my goodness, I'd be stripped of my promotion. All these negative thoughts consumed me, to where, again, lock it down, just like I've locked everything else down over the years. And you put that away, and you just leave it there, and you deal with it. And there is no possible way through that without destroying stuff and having damage done and taking a destructive path. You can't do that. That's not how we operate. If we do, we're going to just facilitate more damage.
Right. I agree. And, and it's so weird. And I think it's just our ego getting in the way. Like, I can't let anybody know this. And if I do, this bad stuff's going to happen. But the minute that you decide, okay, I need to tell somebody, or somebody that has a relationship with us reaches out and says, you doing okay? I can see a little bit of a difference in you. And you vomit this information and this emotional baggage that you're carrying. All of a sudden you're like, holy cow, I need to get out of this, and you start seeing your own issue. I'm assuming
Yep.
that's similar to something that did happen, correct?
Yeah, I start feeling kind of those feelings. And like I said, the reprieve was going to work. Going to work would give me that reprieve I needed. It would, again, allow me to operate in that hypervigilant state that I love, that dopamine chasing. Now I'm in this new role. I feel on. But again, the off season, the off days were absolutely consuming with this darkness.
Yeah.
And it kind of came to a head. We went on a trip to Hawaii. We went on a family vacation to Hawaii. We're taking, 10 days in Maui, a beautiful place. And again, like I had mentioned before, vacations were tough for me. I had trouble disconnecting from work initially because I loved work so much. Now I'm having trouble going on a vacation because I know this darkness will be crushing if I'm gone at a long period of time. 3 days, oh my goodness, that's a lot. You put that out to 10 days, what in the world? And as we go to vacation, and we're there on this beautiful island in paradise and enjoying all the aspects of that, I literally am in one of the worst spots ever. This darkness is consuming me. And each day I'm getting up, I'm having my coffee, and I'm going out for a run. I'm running along the beach. I'm going 6, 7, 8 miles. And I'm not a huge guy that likes to run. I just knew I needed to go out, and that was my only reprieve. While I was running, I would just let my mind go, and I was feeling actually a little bit of a reprieve from this. But even those long runs each day were very temporary band-aids, where before physical activity and some of those things would have a little longer effect to give me that kind of euphoric feeling or that reprieve from this.
Yeah.
It was very, very temporary. Within an hour or so after getting back from a run, showering and stuff like that, that darkness was consuming. And it was getting so bad that about halfway through that vacation, we were out at a beach, kind of north end of this place called Black Rock, and we had rented a cabana, and it's sunny and stuff. I was putting on that happy face for the family. We're having a great time on the beach. If you looked at us and showed video of us, we'd all be smiling and happy. And I am literally at my wit's end. And I'm at the point where it's so bad, I make a decision that I'm going to end my life and not go on. And so, like I said, being in the Marines, we swam, we went through, all those swimming levels you had to go through, and you get to first class. I went to a first class swimmer. I was very competent in the water. I feel good in the water. I didn't grab fins. I didn't grab a mask or anything. My family didn't really think twice about me going out swimming. I'd go out, a ways out from shore, and they don't think anything of it.
Right.
They kind of keep an eye on things, but they're not thinking something's wrong. And I just start swimming out towards the channel, and with the intent that this is it, that I'm gonna end it today. I'm so consumed by this darkness, and I've come to the conclusion that my family and everybody is going to be better off if I can just be gone. And if I can just go out and it looks like I just got swept to sea, no one will be none the wiser. Got good life insurance, got all these things. And yeah, there'll be some sadness, but everyone will be better off. What a lie. And we've all been there where we've seen people at that point in their lives, and we've seen people who've even taken that step towards suicide. And I know I've even said it, how selfish, how could you get to that point? Had you told me that when I took that picture or talked about that picture of my first shift, that, fast forward, a couple decades, I would be at that point of wanting to end my life, I would never have thought that. And here I am swimming out, and the water's clear. And I'm ashamed to say, and it gets me a little emotional, that even looking back at my daughter, on the beach, and seeing her wave, it wasn't enough to turn me around. Shameful. I hate saying it. It brings up emotions, raw emotions, just even thinking about it. It wasn't enough to snap me out of that and turn me around. I kept swimming. I was in this fog. That darkness was crushing me. As I'm swimming out, the water in Maui is super clear. If you think about the West Coast where we swim, even when you're in the marine and stuff, swim on the West Coast, it's murky. water. We're Maui. I mean, you're in 70, 80 feet of water and it's crystal clear.
Yeah.
And I remember swimming and just with this resolve, this fog, like I'm just going to keep swimming. It doesn't matter. And as I look down in the water, it's murky at the bottom, but it's still clear enough that I can see the bottom. I see this dark shadow, pretty large, and it's clearly moving and it's directly in my path, but it's down way deep at the bottom. It's not like it's coming towards me, but it's at the bottom and it's in my path. And for a moment, my mind just cleared. That fog lifted, that darkness lifted, and there was this shot of adrenaline thinking, oh my goodness, what is that? Is that a giant shark? What is that? That's definitely moving. And all those kind of base kind of emotions came back to where like, ooh, I gotta get out of that path of that.
Some
and I had enough.
Yeah,
huh? Exactly. And that was the switch I needed, that moment of clarity to turn me around and get me back to shore. And I remember going back and swimming back to shore and getting out on the beach, and almost immediately that darkness is back. I know God's grace turned me around back on that day, but I get back to the beach. Here's my family, and I am committed more than ever before. I'd said I was committed before. I was committed more than ever before to never, ever speak of this to anybody. They could not have known what was just going on as I swam. They couldn't know anything about it. I put on my facade and we went on with our vacation. And it was a very, very dark time from that moment on, to the point where a couple of days later, I'm sitting on the balcony of our condo, and I'm out there and I'm praying. I'm trying to just feel, how do I get through this? And my wife, who she knew something was wrong, but again, we become very, especially as cops, we become very masterful at putting on facades. I really believe that we can really take on what we need to do. We just do. We hide things very, very well. That's why we have some of the problems we have. And so she knew nothing. But here's a lady that I've known since I was 16 years old. We've been now married for, at that point, like 20 years. And I look back and I had hidden it so well from her to where she had no clue, but she knew something was wrong. And again, that morning she looks out and she saw my face as I thought I was alone on our balcony. And she could see that something was terribly wrong. And she came out, and it was for the first time. That was the first time that I shared with another person the depth of this darkness and struggle.
Yeah.
And for a moment, there was that great lift, that great reprieve, because it's like you got someone involved in this conversation now. You've got that support. And again, it's someone that you trust and you care about and love.
And you know she's going to help carry that load.
Exactly.
You're not going to carry that on your own, which is what you've been doing. Literally, it's like a giant backpack that's just loaded up. And you're like, this thing's so heavy. And she's like, well, let me carry it for a little bit.
Yep. And she was definitely willing. She was definitely willing to be a support. But again, you got to think, as I'm sharing this with her, she's reeling herself. She's now, in her mind, thankful that it wasn't something else. Like she was thinking, well, maybe he's having an affair. Maybe he's doing this or that.
Right.
She's thankful, but she also is thinking, how in the world do I help with this? Yes, I want to help. Yes, I want to be there to support you. But she still now has no context of how to do that. She doesn't have any tools to do that. And so we decide what we'll do is we'll just kind of deal with the trip and we'll kind of go from there. As we get done with the trip, we're at kind of getting ready to go to the airport. We couldn't quite get to the airport. It was too early. We had to get out of our condo. So we're at this mall. We're walking around. And again, I'm still feeling this heaviness, this darkness on me.
Yeah.
I'm thankful Jennifer knows. She's kind of keeping a watchful eye on me. And a buddy calls me while we're at this mall. And he calls me on the phone. He's typically is someone that we just texted each other. Yeah. So it was interesting to get a call from him. So I immediately answered, thinking either he, pocket dialed me or there's something else. And he was just like, hey, what's up? Just checking in and say hi. Totally random, strange. I initially, all my cop senses were like, this is weird. Why are you calling and just checking in to say hi? That's never happened. Come on.
Right.
In short time, I realized he's in a very, very dark spot. He's having suicidal thoughts. He's hopeless. He's all these things. And I go into typical cop mode where we want to fix things. And I want to be that guy to support you and help you. Yeah. And I put my stuff aside and I start kind of working through things. All the things that I'm experiencing at the extreme level right now, I'm trying to put aside and box up so I can help my brother. Mm-hmm. And here we are talking through things, and I'm encouraging him. We end up on the phone. I pray for him. We hang up, go to the airport, airplane mode on, get to Portland, airplane mode off, and his wife's called and he's in the hospital. He attempted suicide. Oh, and man. I was at such a dark spot that I couldn't even go and see him. I had no desire to go and see him. And I feel, again, one of those moments where you feel ashamed that that's how it was, but that's where I was at. I was in such a dark spot in my mind and in my own journey in this stuff that I couldn't even go and be and see and help my brother who was going through the same thing. And we've isolated that way.
Was it a thing where if you went and saw him, you would see yourself?
I think there was part of that. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
And part of it that I felt like a complete hypocrite. I felt that I knew what was going on inside, and now I had Jennifer who knew what was going on inside. And I felt like a complete hypocrite if I was going to go to him and say, hey, you know what? We got to get you into some resources. We got to get you some help for this and move through this when I'm not doing any of that myself.
Right. That's the exact same thing that you need. And you're like, okay, yeah, we'll get you there. We'll make sure it happens. Well, if he were to say, well, you come with me, you're going to do it with me. And you'd be like, well, I don't need that. Know you're lying to yourself.
Exactly. And that would have probably been my response is, oh, I'm good. I got my own support around me. I'm good. When the answer was absolutely, you don't.
Right.
I was in the same spot. In fact, arguably just as bad.
Right.
So
he made it, obviously.
He made it. Exactly. Thankfully. And so we move forward. Yep.
So what was that like? I mean, seeing that almost happen, but then you come back. Was your wife saying, okay, we need to, knowing this position that you're in, she say, okay, we need to find something for you so that doesn't happen to you?
Yeah, I think she was very, very concerned. And so she was keeping a watchful eye. As I got back from vacation, I got right back into work. And again, like I've talked about before, there was that reprieve being at work. So she would see me on some of these work days and things seemed like they were stable.
Right. She
was very worried as I went into my next weekend and so forth, that things were, again, she could tell it wasn't better. And so she's asking, well, what do you think we should do? And again, I'm trying to downplay it. I'm trying to be in this kind of denial state of, well, let's just you and I keep talking about it. You can support me. I'll talk to one of our chaplains that's a close friend, and kind of, I just kept pushing it off. But within short order, it was getting to the point where I knew that this darkness, this depression was going to consume me. And I knew it was going to cost me my life. There was no question that what occurred in Hawaii was on a trajectory that was going to happen again. And it was going to be that point where there was a point of no return.
Yeah.
And as those thoughts and those feelings got worse and worse and worse, I knew I needed help. And Jennifer saw it as well. And she's like, you have got to get help. And with her support, I reached out to, we've got a great chaplain who's very close to me. And I reached out to him. I filled him in on everything, was finally honest with him. He and I had met for years and had a close connection. But again, I'd hid it from him as well. I felt like I had this facade and persona I needed to fulfill and was not dealing with this. And then I got in touch with another really close friend of mine, Brick, who is a fellow sergeant, and shared with him just all the details of everything. And from there, that launched me to where I finally took those steps, much needed steps, to get into some counseling. And that was the key for me. And I think, and I was sharing this with a group, I've been to counselors after a couple of different critical incidents I've been involved with, where my experience with counselors related to our profession, actually, it wasn't good. I felt like it was kind of more of a box check. I felt like there was some, the ones at least I had seen were kind of clock watching, and it was just kind of like, okay, tell me about this or that. It felt very scripted. And so I really was hesitant to even go back to any counseling. When I went to the counselor that I've been to now, things really shifted. I felt like it was a totally different experience for me. And we know that there's just not a one size fits all, but having a counselor who is informed with some of the trauma that we go through, that understands some of that and has some experience in that, is so key. Right. And finding someone who I felt when I went in to visit with them, there was some quick trust that was built, that there wasn't this someone just looking up at the wall, checking the clock. Oh, your hour's up, you got to go. That there was a true person on that other side that was caring and then bringing me real information that I needed to what was going on. Was an absolute key component to me getting on this path of healing. Right. And so moving forward from there, having that support circle around and then having that counselor involved to connect some of the dots I would never have been able to connect on my own was absolutely key. And that's what I shared with cops, is that yes, cops were such fixers. We think we go into situations, we see all sorts of stuff. You think about it, crazy situations, and we come up with really good solutions and fix things oftentimes on the fly. Yeah. And I, in my own mind, was under the misconception that I could absolutely fix this. You know what? I'll read some books on trauma of the brain. I'll read some books on depression. I'll understand where this maybe on a spiritual component's coming from, and I'll fix this. And I'll get support around me and fix it. And had I not taken those steps towards counseling, the counselor was actually connecting dots I never, ever would have connected. And again, it goes back to your point of you don't know what you don't know.
Right. Right.
So,
right. Yeah. And it's cool to have somebody that, you know, they're objective in it. They understand you, but they don't have an emotional necessarily attachment to you. And they're able to sit back and look at this big picture and say, well, what you're saying is that this, okay, yeah. So what? Well, think about, you know, go back X amount of years and this also happened. Oh, and so then you make these connections and all of a sudden they're seeing this thing objectively. Yep. When you're just trying to move forward and trying to stay out of that darkness. Yep. You're not able to see anything. And if that's all you're trying to do is cut through the brush just to get out of the jungle, how are you supposed to be able to know what the bigger objective is and all these other things that have happened? You know, you don't start looking at that. And that's really cool. And it's really important to, I think, to go see somebody who's willing to help you, I guess, just look at things through a different lens, as I've said before. So,
and it's one of those things as I moved kind of through that journey and as I started to heal and get well and understand what had accumulated in my own journey in this job and how I had negatively coped with things, that I started to develop a passion and a desire to get this message out. Again, like I said, this isn't a new message. We've been talking about this. You think about Dr. Gil Martin's book coming out 20 years ago. This has been a topic of conversation, yet again, we still see these suicide rates for police officers, first responders at these high levels. Yeah. And that's the extreme. There's so many other brothers and sisters in these professions that are in various states of taking damage, like we talked about. And so I've had this just passion to get the conversation out. One of the biggest things that's lacked I believe in our profession is us as cops acknowledging some of these things and being vulnerable ourselves. We'll go to training on wellness and even mental health wellness, and we'll listen to the professionals, which we should, the psychologists, the chaplains, and other trained professionals who have great information. However, the missing piece that I believe is there is us as police officers, as first responders, being vulnerable in this conversation. No, we're not all at this extreme that I was, where I was ready to take my own life. Right. But all of us sharing how adversity has affected us, how we've developed some of the negative parts of our story through coping in negative manners, sharing those things with each other and being a little more vulnerable and a little more accepting to this narrative has been lacking. And that's why it's always still strange to me. 2022, here we are, you and I visiting about this. It's still a conversation that's gaining traction. And as I go, and I've been starting to share my story, I started with my own department. I started with my command staff first, just to share a little bit of how I felt we needed to get help for people. Because we've had a wellness policy. Oregon has a Senate bill that requires it. So every agency has a wellness policy, but it's, what does that look like? How is that affecting each person? Because you can't just give a program to every person. A program might work for you, it might not work for me. We need to look at these things as concepts, that this mental, spiritual, emotional, physical wellness has to be a concept based. It has to be interconnected. And sharing that with my initial command staff and sharing my story, I put it all out there. I had no idea how they would react. I didn't know if I was like, well, I'm going to share all this, and if I'm demoted or stripped of everything or whatever else, I'll take that risk. But I feel so strong that we've got to get this conversation out.
Right.
I feel like I'm on such a great path to being healed and helped. And as I shared with them, here it is, the chief, the deputy chief, captains, not a dry eye in the room. As they're reliving their own, I was shocked. I was stunned to see their reaction. It was totally opposite of what I'd gone into. I'd prayed for it. I'd actually, my wife, she's like, I'm praying they just are receptive to it. And they were. And I was like, I'm shocked. I'm like, holy smokes, they're hearing this. They're nodding. And our chief, at the time, Chief Groshong, she just retired, and our deputy chief and the captains, they all immediately came to the conclusion that we needed to make some adjustments, including one of the big one was the counseling, getting more trauma-informed first responder type counselors on our plan that officers could see for free,
right?
Helping with deductibles, because initially to go to see the counselor I wanted to see that I felt was critical, we were paying $1,000 out of pocket a month, and for a family, that's an enormous lift.
Yeah,
but we were willing to do it. We're at that point, but having an agency now that was hearing that part of the story and saying, we don't want anyone to have money or stigma or any of these things to be a barrier, and just immediately crushing forth. I give, Chief Groshong and the Deputy Chief Williams, who both now have just recently retired from our area, I can't give them enough credit. They phenomenal leaders for our agency and did a great job moving this conversation down in a very short order. And then from there, that launched to where in our department in service for an entire month, we brought every sworn and non-sworn member, about 200 so members, through to, and I shared my story. And I have a really close friend of mine, he shares his story. So we kind of tag team wellness. And that was kind of the launch to where why we're talking today. It's launched me onto where I feel, this path I've been on, where I've been healed, where God has brought me through this, is that I've been able to move forward. I feel more passionate than ever before of getting this conversation going, talking to cops. And as I've shared my own story, as I've shared kind of some training around wellness and what it should look like, where we've siloed it into physical fitness, like we've talked about,
right,
and really connecting these things. It is amazing. Now I've had the opportunity to go to many different parts of our country, and even, like I said, just recently here in Montana, to a bunch of different agencies, and you see cops just, it breaks things down. Hearing another cop share their journey just breaks down these barriers.
Yeah.
And the conversations I'm hearing after are just unbelievable. In fact, even when we're talking, I'm seeing like a text come in from one of the guys I'm close with, and he's sharing part of his own story.
That's cool.
That's what we need. That's what changes it. You're doing it by bringing these guests on, having a podcast. We're shifting this narrative where this perception of what policing is, and this narrative that's been out there about what policing is or isn't, all these different things, we're breaking that down by us being vulnerable, sharing these other sides of police work, sharing these other sides of service. And that's what's gaining traction. That's what's breaking this down to move us forward. Right. And I love it. I'm excited about it.
Yeah. And it's cool because you don't know what somebody's going through. You might think that you do. And if you don't develop that relationship with them, you don't see that in them. Because like you said, you go in there and you told your command staff, hey, this has happened to me. They had no idea. They're bawling, they're telling they're seeing themselves in it. But your wife, who knows you probably better than anybody else on this planet, she saw it first because she saw how you were reacting. And I've talked about this with several other guests on here, that you know people and they know you. There's certain people that just are closer to you. And so when they see you off, they see you just not in your groove, they know that. And if they have the guts, they have hair one to say, what are you doing? You're out of step. Things are different. I don't like you this way. I want to see you back to the Jason that you were, or whatever your name is. I want to see you back to there. They have to have the guts to come before you and face that dark side of you, and then be willing to admit when you start saying, yes, well, I'm having this problem here, that they're willing to say, well, I'm going to stand by you the whole time. I'm not going to walk past. I'm not going to try. Well, you need to go talk to somebody. It's not me. I got to go do something else.
Yeah.
You don't want, that's not the friend that you're looking for. And so that's why it's hard to do it, because sometimes you don't trust people. You just don't trust some people. And, we have those, we go through traumatic incident debriefings or whatever. And let's say you're in there. And I talked to Michael Segru one time on here, and he was saying, yeah, those are great, but you don't want to bring those up in front of a group because you don't trust some of the people, and not because they're going to screw over your career. They're going to do whatever. You don't trust them emotionally to just open up yourself about that. And it's difficult. So that's why I always say it's important that we develop relationships with people.
Absolutely.
And you need to develop that relationship with somebody, and you can't just stay in your own little world, because at some point you're going to need somebody. And say, no, I'm strong enough, I can handle myself. No, you need to have somebody in your life, several somebodies. You can't just have one, but you got to have those multiple people. So then those multiple people are going to help carry that load.
Absolutely.
They're going to be able to come by. So you have your wife, you have your best friend, you have your boss, or your whatever, whoever you trust. And then that person, they're going to be able to come together and be like, okay, we're going to help him get through this. And it's weird. It's like one of those things where if they ask that question, if you were able to go to your own funeral, who are you going to see there? There's some people you're going to see there. You'll see your wife. You'll see your best friend.
Yeah.
But then whatever. And that's the thing you're never going to be able to do. You can't say, well, I know that person's going to be there. Do you? Do you know that person over there is going to be there or whatever? And it's kind of a weird. It's almost surreal thinking of something like that, but you got to look at it like that sometimes.
You do. You have to look at that, and that's part of even what we'll talk about when we do our training. We talk about the spiritual wellness. That's one that makes people kind of squirm in the seats. We always think of physical wellness. Okay, we're talking about mental wellness, emotional wellness. We think about things. That spiritual wellness is thinking about that. Just like you said, we're all going to die at some point. And a lot of times people squirm in their seats because they don't want to think about their own mortality. They don't want to think about that end point. And like you said, who would be there at that funeral? We'd like to avoid those things. They're uncomfortable. They're things that oftentimes for many people are very uncertain or fearful. And we see that, but all the more important to have that a part of the conversation. We need to have that part of the conversation. And kind of back to what you were saying too, is part of having all this overall conversation on wellness is having people in place that can identify the blind spots in our lives, having those people are close, those relationships. And that's just it, is we can't rely on that every agency has the same command structure that's going to be agreeable to these things. There are many that are not. Sadly, there are many that are under command structures that don't want to have this conversation, don't see it the same way. And sadly are keeping people on this path of the culture we've kind of created for decades. That's all the more reason why, as we see these things and understand these things and come alongside our brothers and sisters, we get to know them, so that when we recognize changes in them, subtle changes or coping mechanisms that are negative, we know them well enough to recognize them, one, and two, we can be that source of support, encouragement, and help them move through that. We all need it. And that's something that we're just starting to do a better job at, but we still have a lot of work to do. And that's part of the whole reason. That's where I feel like my next path is kind of moving forward doing that. I don't have any intention of retiring anytime soon from my day job. I love still being a cop, but I see the other part of that is kind of parallel to that, is helping get this conversation going, helping inspire others to have the courage to share their own story, even if it's with another brother or sister they're serving with, to gain some traction and help others.
Right. How did you get people to other departments and whatnot to buy in on this? So you were able to tell your command staff, who said, oh, this is great. We need to get everybody to see this, because if they can see themselves in this, maybe we can get them help too. Your own department's one thing, but how'd you start moving into other departments and other areas and saying, hey, yeah, we love that. We want to see that too.
Yeah. Part of it is there's a couple ways. It's again, I just think, God opens different doors in different seasons of our lives for us. And we work through that. I believe that's absolutely how this works. Some of the ways is a year ago, I wrote a book, More Than a Cop. I think you're familiar. You had it when you took a look at the website.
Sure, yeah.
That book outlines my whole journey. I talk about not only the story I've shared with you today, but I've also shared that with, I've shared some of the other things that led up to all the events we've talked about today. That has got, out to different people as I've had opportunities to present at conferences like I lead in some of these other conferences. It gets word out. One that kind of started to gain some traction, just opened some doors to the conversation, was I wrote an article called Redefining Adversity on Caliber Press. And after that, there was a lot of response from other agencies around our country and even locally that just are interested in what we're doing as an agency, but just also to hear more. And that's opened doors to just do the training. Our nonprofit, my wife and I founded a nonprofit last year. It just got its status as a nonprofit. We're waiting for that tax exempt status still, because things just work very slow government wise. But
What?
It's called,
No.
I know that's weird,
but
it's called Foundation for. It's Foundation for. It's foundation, and it's the Roman numerals IV, and it's building that solid foundation to remain code for day one through retirement is kind of our purpose statement.
Right.
And our slogan is redefining adversity. Like we've talked about on even the beginning of this, that we're going to face adversity. We're going to take damage from the things we see and do in this career.
Yeah.
It's redefining how that's affected us for decades of policing, redefining how we let people in, how we're vulnerable, how we look in acquire resources to help move forward for overall wellness, resiliency, getting out of the siloed looks at these things. Well, I'm going to work on my mental wellness today. Tomorrow, I'm going to work on my physical wellness. We silo these things still, but connecting these things and seeing that our mental, physical, spiritual, emotional wellness are absolutely interconnected, and having a concept-based program to facilitate that, so that when you look at yourself and who you're working with in your agency, your needs are going to be different than me and my agency. Potentially, we're going to have some commonality because of the job we do,
right?
But your interconnectedness of how that looks in your life and in your agency might be different. And getting this conversation going and getting it in a more concept-based model is something that we just haven't done a great job at. And it's been kind of segmented to different parts of our country, but I'm trying to get this out a little further. And that's where, even like this week, I've been here in Montana presenting at a state conference, and there's all these different agencies. And again, some of them have some great wellness programs in place in their agencies. Others have nothing, but inspiring them to get that conversation and motivating them to get the conversation out. That's where I see the lane being. So.
Right. And I've talked to a ton of people who on here and elsewhere who agree with that 100%, that we have to talk about it. We have to get people to understand that they can talk about it, because that's a big thing that people don't like, especially police officers don't want to talk about.
Yep.
I'm okay. I'm fine. I don't need any help. We're an A-type personality who we fix things, we make things happen, and we go out and we're assertive and aggressive in getting things done, which is great. But you still have to go back and get maintenance every once in a while. You still have to. And I have several different analogies I like to use. One of them is the ship that's been out to sea for so long, it has to come into port at some point. It can't navigate those small travel lanes within port. They have to have a tugboat come in and kind of push them around, and then push them into dock so they can get reloaded, they can get restocked, they can get their new passengers, they get their new crew, they can get everything fresh. And then they still have to come out of port, and they can't do that by themselves either. So they have a tugboat, bringing them out and moving them and kind of guiding them. And that's what the people that support us are. They're those tugboats. Another analogy that I like to use that I got from a guy was, if we were at work and your car gets that check engine light come on, do you just leave it? Do you just let it come on and you keep driving that thing? Or do you get in trouble if you don't take it in and say, hey, take it to the shops or whatever, and they can get their maintenance done on it?
Yep.
Because if it breaks down, who's going to be responsible? The last guy that drove it, because he didn't let anybody know that the check engine light come on. You got to let people know that your check engine light's on sometimes, because because departments are solid about, we got to make sure that's fixed. We got to make sure it's taken care of because those are our cars. They're expensive, all this stuff. Our people are way more expensive. Our people are way more valuable than a car. So
Absolutely.
the problem is we don't have a check engine light. So we have to be able to look at it just a little bit differently. Where's that check engine light? And that's where personality comes in. That's where relationships come in. And I can't harp on that enough.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I agree with that. So
yeah.
So your book is More Than a Cop, and people can buy that where?
It's on Amazon. Sometimes it's funny how on Amazon it's a little harder to find. You have to go into books and look it up and things like that. The easiest link is just go to the website that we have. It's foundation4.com. It's foundationiv.com. And if you go on there, there's a link directly to Amazon. You can pick it up there if you want.
And you can learn all about Jason and everything that you're doing and the guys you work with and all that stuff, huh?
Absolutely. So
that's cool. So you're not looking at retiring anytime soon. At 25 years, you're going to be one of those 30-year guys. I'm guessing. Right?
My guess is yes. I still enjoy my job. I still enjoy my role. I've always looked at as retirement as one of those things. I just have never set a date. I know that there's seasons of life, and I'll know when it's right. And I just want to continue where I feel I'm called to right now. But I'm always hesitant to put a date on it. Some people have that date. I'm going to retire at this date. I've never had that. So my guess is I'll keep going. Obviously, I don't want to do this job forever.
Sure.
But I know there's benefits. This far in your career, you kind of stay the course until you've completed what you feel that you've been called to complete. And that's my goal.
Yeah. So that's cool. And so people can get a hold of you and find out what you're doing on Foundation 4. They can read your book. And you go to conferences all the time, speak at conferences and whatnot, all sorts of different kinds. So if your department's listening for, looking for conferences and they see Jason Sery, I guess they're in for a treat, or is your presentation kind of boring and stuff like that?
Yeah, it's really boring. I don't. I'm kidding. We offer. I do some speaking engagements, but the main ones we do is we do a 4 and an 8 hour training. The 4 hour training I can do it myself. The 8 hour, obviously, that's a long time. Even the 4 hour can be a long time. But it's solid material. It's very cop to cop, and the team of guys that I have that help me out with this are solid guys. They're cops. And so we're a new nonprofit. This isn't like we've been doing this for decades by any means, but it's something that we're all equipped. We're all seasoned presenters. We're seasoned veteran cops. We all have our own story. And the whole purpose of it is, again, having cops in front of cops, sharing their stories and breaking down some of these barriers. And some of the guys that I have on my team, they all have their own stories. They all have their own careers. And they come from different levels. Some are command staff and some are not. And that's, I think, what's good is it resonates with just about any audience that you might have. That's cool. And the content is so simple. In fact, that was some of the feedback we just got this week was some of these veteran cops. They're like, we do a lot of wellness stuff and we've brought in other people and there's stuff all out there that you should take in. There's lots of material, but we keep it very simple, very applicable for cops. Even my book, you'll see it's cop print. It's the big print. There's pictures. It's all stuff
spaced out a little bit.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I had I was reading the cop book and I talked to another guy who was on here and Scott Medlin, and he wrote a book, and I said, it's easy cop reading because you can read a paragraph, whatever, the spacing's out, it's good enough. And if you're like at the airport or something, you read that and you finish a paragraph and you can look around, like, because that's what we do as cops. You're always on that hypervigilant, looking around, and then you can go back in your book and you're not trying to figure out, where was I at? It's easy to remember because it's spaced out enough. You read your next paragraph, you can look up, look around, and then you're back to it. And that sounds like exactly like what your book is as well. So
yep, exactly.
Cool. So Jason, I can't thank you enough for coming on today. That your story is absolutely, we didn't even get into some of the stuff that you've done. I mean, some of the hairy stories that you have and the, some of the trauma that you dealt with and stuff that caused the trauma that you went through. But, your story, you get a good grasp on it and you get a good understanding of where you come from, what you want to do and how you want to help people in doing that. And that's motivating. That's inspiring to to me and to, I'm sure, a lot of other people.
I appreciate that. I appreciate you having me on, and Ken, I appreciate what you're doing too. I know that you're in line with this. I know that you're a cop's cop doing your thing as well. And so I appreciate the podcast. I see the guests you're having on. I know you're wanting to get conversations out there and change some of the conversation related to a lot of different topics. And so I appreciate that. Thanks for that. And we scratched the surface. It's amazing. We've been doing this now for a couple hours and it feels like we're just scratching the surface, but that's how life is. Everyone has their story and their journey.
Right. And that's exactly true. And, I can't thank you enough to get more people on here like that want to do that want to help other people is just kind of something that I'm hoping I can continue to do. And, but if it hadn't been for a mutual friend of ours that says, hey, you should check him out. It would have been, I don't know if I'd ever got in touch with you, and I think it's great that we were able to. So thanks for coming on, and it's more than appreciated. And,
thanks, Ken. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. So I will I guess bid you a good day, and I hope everything just works out for you. I hope that you continue to work, and obviously if it ever comes down to it, you need to get back on here and tell some more stuff that's going on. You're more than welcome. You had an open invitation to come back anytime.
That's outstanding. I'll probably take you up on it.
That'd be cool.
Cool.
All right, Jason,
nice.
You have a great day.
You as well.
See ya.
Thanks, Ken. Bye.
And after the magic of the interwebs and everything else that happens with the editing of podcasts and whatnot, Jason Sery has left the building, so to speak, and I am once again by myself in my studio talking to you guys. And I know I'm not as eloquent and or interesting as some folks. However, I do agree with what Jason said. There's a lot of stuff that cops go through, and he's not the exception. He is, and I'm not saying he's average, but he's one of those guys that he was willing, he was courageous enough to step forward and say, this is happening to me. And everybody else was able to see, wow, that happens to me too. Because we're not alone in this. We all go through that. And we have to get to a point where we say, I'm not alone, and I need some help. I need some help. And if we're willing to do that, if we're willing to get into that position where we want to help each other out and we want to see everybody else succeed around us, then we should be good enough to be able to help each other and speak out. Trust your brothers and your sisters that are around you. And if you're feeling that way, if you're feeling at that point where not that it's just you can't do it anymore, but that everybody would be better off if you just weren't here. If you're feeling that, I can't urge you enough just to be willing to say something to somebody. Just say something, because there's gonna be some help that's gonna come in and help you out. You're not gonna be alone in it, but you just have to say something. I mean, and there's points where you're feeling, well, I don't feel that bad. I don't want to do that. Okay, well, let's cut it off at the pass and try to say something before you get to that point where you do start feeling that way. Because what is going to make you feel that way at some point? Do you think Jason ever felt like, he said he's feeling those dark times on his Tuesdays, on the beginning of his days off, and then it would go away. Do you think he felt like when he's flying to Hawaii that I'm going to go ahead and feel that way when I get there? No. I guarantee he was just feeling depressed and bummed out or whatever, and just in that dark place. And then it comes at you fast. I've seen people actually that have committed suicide, and they didn't realize how damaging it was. They didn't realize how dangerous it was ahead of time. So you have to say something. Reach out. There are you can Google it. There's hotlines or whatever. And if you don't feel like you want to do hotlines and that sort of thing, reach out to somebody that you can trust. They're not going to judge you. They're not going to think that you're bad. They're not going to treat you bad. They're not going to put you down. They're going to be there to help you out. So I know that was a little bit of a heavy topic today, and I know that it was But it's important to talk about these things. It's important to talk about these subjects. We need to get these out there, and we need to make these happen. We need to take care of each other, because honestly, we're all we got. Our dogs are great. They come alongside us. They provide support, and they emotional, make us feel better. But to be honest with you, they're not going to be able to guide you to go get some help, to go talk to somebody. They're not going to be able to talk you into going and talking to, a counselor or whatever. They're there. They're going to hug you. They're going to love you. Sure, but they don't have a physical ability to go do things that we need other people in our lives to go do. So I would encourage you that if you're feeling that way, if you're getting to that point, I don't care if you're a police officer or not a police officer. I don't care if you're a family member or you're just a friend of a police officer, or you just like listening to one police officer's podcast. If you're feeling that way, reach out. And if you're feeling that way and you're like, I don't have anybody around me, well, then get a hold of me on whatever messaging system that I always talk about, whether Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or LinkedIn. Send me a message. I'd be happy to help you. If I can help you do it, I'll be happy to help you do it. And I know a ton of people. Obviously, if you listen to the podcast, there's a ton of people on here who also have organizations who are willing to come forward and say, we want to help you out. And if you're not in that position, we want to help somebody get to you so you can be helped out. Because you don't always have to do this alone. You can reach out to somebody. So along the lines of that topic, and not the topic of suicide, but the topic of social media, you can get a hold of us on all of those that I talked about on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and LinkedIn. You can get a hold of the What's a Hero podcast and me on those. And you can tell us, join the conversation, talk about it, and all that good stuff. I put a thing on every week for whatever podcast. I'll put a little advertisement, little video I'll make, and it will have the person on there and the person I'm talking to. And as we're going through it, you can put a little thing in each one of those posts and say, hey, yeah, I like this, or I didn't like this, or, sometimes I'm feeling that way. Or you can, like I said, instant message me and say, hey, I'm struggling with this, and not that I'm the smartest guy in the world, but I know some smart people. So just, you have to take that step out sometimes and trust that people are there for your best interest. If things are dark for you, reach out. But check us out on those social media websites. You can also find this and every other podcast on www.thewhatsaheropodcast.buzzsprout.com, and you can find every previous episode. You can stream it directly from there, or it'll take you to your favorite podcast platform. You can download each episode. You can subscribe to each episode, or subscribe to the show, and then it will tell you when I have a new episode that pops up. So go ahead and subscribe. Subscribing's cool. It helps out. It helps me out. It helps you out to know what's going on. And when you download those from the subscribing, you can download it, have that. Helps my numbers, helps your numbers, helps everybody's numbers be better. And I don't know if that really is the case. However, it helps my numbers. I know that. And it'll also help you be able to have that whenever you want. I have several guests who have passed away. And my wife was telling me last night, her dad was one of my guests in early episodes 5, 6, and 7. And he passed away not too long after we recorded the episode. And she says, I'm able to hear his voice still. And that's cool. And that really, I hadn't even thought about that, but that's something that works for her. So nevertheless, download the episodes. You can have them with you, take them with you. You can have your friends listen to them. I know they're a little longer, so it's not something you can just necessarily listen to and pop in there. However, you can listen to it on your commute. You can listen to it while you're working out. You can listen to it when you go on long runs or whatever the case may be. I know that I had a friend that, like I said, he listened to it. He downloaded an episode, was listening to an episode while he was in Las Vegas because there was so much other sound going on at his hotel that he wanted something, I don't know, he wanted something to fall asleep to. Maybe I just have a boring voice. So be it. But he was able to get that, and had he not downloaded, he wouldn't have had that. So, and I appreciate that. That's cool. Nevertheless, check us out on all those interweb platforms, and you can be part of the conversation, and we can help people get better. So with that, I do want to thank Jason Sery for coming on. You can get his book, like I said, like he said, on Amazon. You can check out his website. I'll post it on the social media links and websites, or social media posts that I put out. And you can find him at Foundation 4. That's Foundation Roman numeral 4.com. And it has his whole bio on there, and it has a ton of different stuff. And if you, it has consulting, and he has a link to get his book, all that good stuff. So, just go check him out. It's cool stuff. And I'm going to take the last bit from what he says on his bio, and that says, it's from Isaiah 43:2. When you go through deep waters, I will be with you. When you go through rivers of difficulty, you will not drown. When you walk through the fire of oppression, you will not be burned up. The flames will not consume you. You're not alone. So I want to thank Jason Sery for coming on here. I want to thank for all the people who do support this podcast. You guys are awesome. I know right now it's just a you support by downloading and listening. At a certain future point, I'm going to have some, sponsors, I'm sure. But at this point, thank you for listening. Thank you for being there, you guys. And I had one gentleman the other day that said, "Hey, I listen to it all the time." And there's a guy I used to live in the same town as him, and we'd see each other quite often. And I don't see him too often anymore, but I saw him just the other day, and I said, "That's great." And he says, "I love it. It's a great podcast." And I said, "That's cool." So, David, thank you so much for listening, buddy. But remember that you're not alone. You're not in this alone. Not only do you have friends, you have people rooting for you that you don't even know. And I know that some people don't necessarily ascribe to a Christian mindset or Christian belief. However, I do, and I know that the Lord is with you, and He's with me in what we do. So remember all those things. The flames will not consume you. So for Jason Sery, I've been Ken Frownfelter, and this has been the What's a Hero podcast. We are clear.